Welcome to Healing Echoes. Today we have with us Katie Dickieson, a remarkable individual whose journey spans the realms of science and creativity. She holds titles as a licensed hairstylist and certified holistic nutritionist, boasts a master's in biomedical engineering from Cornell University, and is a best-selling author in self-help, LGBTQ+, and survival memoir categories with her compelling memoir, Remember Who the Fuck You Are. Furthermore, Katie is pioneering a groundbreaking dating app, Wing, in development, all while championing resilience and advocating for mental health and neurodiversity. Hey,
Hello.
how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
Pretty good. So I did want to just start off with you talking about your book and kind of what led you to writing it.
Yeah, sure. So I've been writing since I was in middle school. I'm probably even younger than that. I really liked writing poetry, and I always knew I wanted to write a book. And I feel like I just rewrote the beginning. I would always like start at the first page and be like, this is the intro to my life. And then 2 years ago, I finally got really serious about it. And like with my ADHD, the way I set it out was I started from the beginning of like when I was born to up until this moment. And then there were certain topics I wanted to do, and I did it in chronological order. I got like 200 pages. And then I was like, this isn't the story, but this is how I'm getting it out. And then I actually met my publisher through a St. Pete girl boss who I've never even met to this day. I don't even know who it is. She just posted on the group. And she was incredible. She allowed me to self-publish, meaning no one owns my words, so I can use my words as much as I want.
Nice.
And she really pulled my story out of me because I was afraid to write specific aspects of my story. And I was like, I'm just going to write a book called Homeless to Mars. And it's going to be about my journey in school from the age of 28 until 33. Right.
Right.
And then she was like, no, your story is much bigger than this. Like, you can't just write about that. Like, people won't understand why that's important without your background.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was a very grueling process. Like, it takes all of your emotional and physical health to an extreme. I feel like if you write a book, especially, I mean, either way, and fiction or nonfiction, you're becoming those characters, you're reliving those experiences. And it was important for me because I haven't felt seen my entire life. Like one of the titles was like gay enough. And then it's like being seen by my family. And the more I wrote and the more I shared my writing, the more I recognized that other people had very similar experiences, but were too afraid to share them. And so I was like, well, I'm kind of the person who's like, if I have the ability to do something, then I should do it. If it's like positive.
Yeah. I was going to say when you were talking about how she was telling you that like your story is bigger than that, I was thinking to myself, in true neurodivergent form, you have to give all the context. I think it's very important, especially with a story like yours. You have to kind of start from the beginning. Neurodivergent myself, so I completely understand. I am reading it, as you know, and it is an amazing book. It definitely is triggers some emotions, especially if you have trauma yourself, especially related to family. It's like, oh, okay, other people feel this. So I think it's really important, the message that you're getting out there. Can you tell me how you came up with the title that you finally settled on? Because I love it.
Yeah. So actually, I feel like anytime someone asks me this, I have to share something physical.
Yes.
When I first started writing like seriously 2 years ago, I had this white elephant gift that I had moved through 4 different places through the United States with me, and I hated it. Like, it was one of those gifts that I was like, this is stupid, I'm never going to use it, but somehow it made it with me all across the United States. And finally, one day when I was writing, it just like came to me, and it was like my mantra, and I was like, it just made me feel like hardcore, and it made me, when I was younger, I don't know if you've got to the part in the book where I chop off all my hair at
I
school.
did.
Yeah. So when that happened, as I got older, I would look back at that little girl and be like, damn, she was such a fucking badass. And I'm like, if I had the balls to do that, why don't I have the balls to do other things?
Right.
So the white elephant gift was this, and I just never knew what to write on it. And finally, this is what it became. And
I love that.
I just put a little picture of me because I like doing inner child work.
Yeah.
And I just left it at the front of my desk, and it stays there forever now.
That's perfect. Yeah, I loved that part of the book. Because I did something similar. I didn't do it in childhood. I actually did it in my early 20s, but I was just so tired and was going through all my own things that it was definitely like a message to people.
Yeah.
And I mean, I all the way off. I buzzed. I was bald for like a year.
I'm kind of jealous. It's something I've been rethinking about doing.
Uh-huh.
The first time I've had this long of hair, so it's hard because I'm like, oh my God, I have hair for the first time in my life that's like long. But God, there was nothing more exhilarating than that feeling.
It's very empowering, especially as a woman. I still have like the whole side and under is undercut is a buzz, and I get questioned about it all the time. And I've had it, yeah. I've had this haircut for years now, and I still get people like, why would you do that? I'm like, because it's my hair and I want to.
It's such a strange thing too. Like,
it really is.
I don't know, why do you make your hair the way it looks? You know, like, to anyone who asks that.
Well, and if you have a certain hairstyle and it's not even the hairstyle you want, you're doing it because you know it's what other people accept. Maybe you need to unpack that. But if like I've read the book and I've seen you speak, and so I know more of your story than the listeners do, obviously. So do you mind talking a little bit about your background and the trauma that you've kind of overcome?
Oh, no, not at all. Is there something from the book that you've read that you want me to elaborate on?
I think more of the familiar trauma within the home, kind of how you overcome that. I don't know if you still have relationships with them, so maybe how you work through that as an adult now.
Yeah, so actually, this is the first time I'm talking about this, so this is good. Because I knew it would come to this at some point.
Yeah.
It's weird because my family is very close in the sense that I have a big family and we've always gone on vacations together. But my entire family has always been, let's make a joke out of everything and we're not going to talk about anything serious. And from a very young age, I had always been extremely emotional and wanting to understand how things work. I wanted, like when your parents say, because I said so, you're like, well, fuck you, like, I want to know why you're saying that.
Yeah.
But the big thing for me, I recognized was the gaslighting, so much so. Like when I was younger, my parents used to lock me in my room and throw a popcorn bowl in there for me to go to the bathroom. And a few years ago, I finally confronted them about that. And they told me that it never happened. And I felt insane. Like I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like, how could I just make this up? And so I asked, my sister and I aren't very close, but I asked her because I was like, I never wanted to bring this up to you, but did this happen? And she's like, I confronted mom and dad about that a few years ago. Like and I'm like, okay,
right.
This is real.
Yeah.
And through the process of writing this book, I knew a lot of this was going to come up. And that was actually one of the stories. That was the biggest story that I was like, am I going to share this or not? And my whole family knew I was writing a book. No one acknowledged it. No one has still acknowledged it. Yeah. And it's kind of one of those things where I'm like, if you would have talked to me about it or been like, hey, we would like to talk to you about what you're going to write and if there's anything that we need to discuss, but like none of those conversations came up.
No.
And even when I came out as pansexual, like I specifically came out on Facebook because I was like, if I do this publicly, they cannot ignore me anymore.
Yeah, they can't deny it.
Yeah. And then they still tried to tell me they thought it was a joke. And I'm like, what do you mean you thought it was a joke?
Oh, goodness.
Who does that?
They've joked about serious things for too long, it seems like.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was just so many parts. I mean, I'm about halfway through it now because when I've told you like I can't put it down, I'm not joking. I read it when I'm waiting on my daughter's bus. Like any chance I have to pull it up and read it, I'm reading it.
That means so much to me because it validates my experience too. And it makes me feel not so alone to know that other people are resonating with it so much.
Oh, definitely. So much of it, I think it's funny that we have similar names too.
Yeah.
Growing up, I actually wanted to be Katie. Was not allowed to be. My mom would tell people I named her Caitlin, so you have to call her Caitlin. You cannot call her Kate or Katie.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but there's just so much like the joking or like that didn't happen that I can relate to because it's like, especially if it's a memory from childhood, why would a child fabricate this whole memory that never happened? It's more like it happened and you don't remember it the same way because you're the axe and we're the trees, or you just want to deny that it ever happened. I'm like, oh my God. So I'm sitting here reading this book and I'm like, okay, this doesn't just happen to me. This has happened to other people. It's insane to me. The similarities even. And it's like affirming and at the same time like I don't want anybody else to have ever been through this.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's like the big, like you had asked me if I still have a relationship with my family, and it got to a point where finally I was like, for so long I was worried about what they were going to think when the book came out, that I got to a point where I was like, I need to create space and distance because I can't handle that this is our relationship and they're still ignoring these things exist. And it's crazy because even once I like stated my boundaries very clearly and was like, this is what I'm comfortable with and what I'm not, they still act like I never even said that.
Yeah, it's like you never spoke.
Yeah, even about that. And I'm like, this is insane. Like pretending like things don't happen. And the thing is too, is that I don't hold a grudge. Like I'm not even about my parents sending me away. Like I have forgiven them for all these things, but I think maybe they haven't forgiven themselves or even acknowledged to forgive themselves or that they did anything wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, and denial is that first thing you have to get over. And it seems like she's still in denial. Even in this interview, I've been like, okay, yeah, I feel that too. The denial of things even into adulthood or things that you've announced into adulthood, like coming out. When I came out, really the only family members I was still in contact was with my mom and my sister. They completely denied it. I'd have girlfriends, they wouldn't even talk about them. They wouldn't ask about them because in doing so, they'd have to acknowledge that it was my partner. I had a couple years, a good 4 or 5 years that I was polyamorous. And they would ask about my male partners, but would not ask about my female partners. And then in a sense of storytelling, this podcast, I tell my own story as well. And I knew that there would be a lack of wanting to support it because they knew, especially knowing me and the loudmouth that I am, that if I'm going to tell my story, I'm going to tell it honestly. Yeah. And that would paint them in a bad light. And they don't want that. And so I had even addressed it with them and was like, if you don't want to listen to the episodes where I tell my own story and you only want to listen to episodes of guests, like I understand that. And my mom had come back and she was like, yeah, because I just think it would be too hard on my mental. And I'm like, what about mine? Like, you're listening to my story about how like my childhood was not great, but you're not going to, and some people would argue, like, at least she knows her boundaries. I'm like, yeah, but
that's like one of those things, though. Like, it reminds me of the Jonah Hill bullshit where, like, he's using tools that he's learned from therapy in a gaslighting
Yep.
and abusive way. And it's not that's not how it works.
Yeah, they've taken the healthy things, the healthy terms and modalities, and they've weaponized them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, ooh, which is why into adulthood, you kind of have to realize that if those people haven't admitted, I think you have realized that as well, if they can't admit what even happened back then, but not only that, they're continuing to take that behavior into your adulthood, you kind of have to start distancing yourself. Yeah. Otherwise, they continue to traumatize you, and they're like, you're over it at this point. You're like, no, no more.
Yeah, because it's almost like they're so used to you being a different person, and then you create boundaries and they can't handle it because they've been so used to you changing who you, it's like masking as a neurodivergent person. Like you have just made everybody else as comfortable as possible while they've ignored what your comfort is. But I wanted to say, like, I didn't know that you were polyamorous. And that is, I don't know if you got to that part of my book, but like, that's something that is really important to me. And I'm in a monogamous relationship right now, but I don't feel like enough people talk about that. And
they don't. It was such a taboo. I am currently monogamous with my husband, but we met when we were polyamorous. I was polyamorous for a very long time. And even choosing to be monogamous now, it's my choice. It has not changed my stance on polyamory or any form of ethical non-monogamy possible. I think people need to learn to live their lives what's best for them, as long as it's not hurting anybody and they're all consenting adults. Let people live their lives.
I totally agree.
And I don't think I got to that part in the book. I think you had, I don't know if it was a post because I had scrolled back on your social media, but I think I had caught on to when it was like multiple partners, and I was like, I think she's polyamorous. Or husband.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when me and my partner that I'm with now, he and I have been on again, off again for like almost 12 years now.
Yeah.
And when he and I were broken up, we were broken up for like 5 years. And during that entire time, I didn't have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, but I had multiple relationships, was very adamant about honesty. And then when I moved to Ithaca, New York, you would never know, but upstate New York is like the biggest polyamorous community. Like I could not find someone in that town that wasn't ethically non-monogamous.
That's funny.
This is wonderful. Like,
you're like, this is awesome. Here's where the market's at.
Yeah.
So in writing your book, you really touch on the importance of storytelling in the healing process. So how do you believe that sharing, not necessarily just sharing your story, but like your personal narrative, how do you feel like that fosters understanding and empathy for people?
This was a process I had to go through in the writing process. It was really hard for me to only stick to my story, because every time I would tell a story, as I would be writing it, immediately my brain would go to, well, there's people who have had it worse, you know, and I kept doing that so often and recognizing other people's experiences. And my publisher was like, your story is what's unique and is what's going to help people. Like anyone who's going to read your story already thinks what you're like writing about. Like you don't need to tell them other people have had it worse, but it allows people to, like, at one point, I know I write in the book and I'm like, it doesn't matter if your experience is worse than mine or if it was better than mine. Either way, it doesn't negate like what your experience is, because I see all of our experiences like a spectrum, and that either way, we only know what is the worst we've ever been through and the best that we've ever been through. And I think that reading other people's stories, for me, I don't know if you've read it, but Glennon Doyle's Untamed.
Not yet, no.
Oh my gosh, you're gonna love it.
It's on my list.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I listened to that audiobook right before I finished my manuscript, and I was like, oh my God, this is what does this for me. She comes from a very like religious background like me, but while I was listening to it, and I was like, oh man, she touches on all these points and talks about all these things I talk about. And then I realized, I'm like, except for There's nothing about being neurodivergent in here. There's nothing about ethical non-monogamy. There's like, and I was like, this is where the holes are. And my story helps fill in holes that otherwise wouldn't be talked about.
Yeah, I think it's very important. Especially like you're saying, like that personal, it doesn't take anything away. We can all hold space for each other's stories.
Yeah.
I think that's why it resonated. Obviously, mine's in podcast form. I have considered writing, but that would be way in the future. So like seeing your book get published and starting to read it was really like, of course I resonate with it, and I always, being neurodivergent myself, I always relate and have to verbally be like, I've been through that too. It's a way of showing empathy. I'm sure you know that.
Yes.
But you know, be it in book form or podcast or however it is, I always try to emphasize that it's so important. I think really that the storytelling is such a big part of the healing process, even if it's just writing it out for oneself. I think it's really, really important. So I want to thank you for coming on and talking and sharing, but I want to give you an opportunity to plug where people can find your book, where they can find you if you're willing.
So my Instagram is at Katie Dickieson. My website is katiedickieson.com. The book is Remember Who the Fuck You Are, with a star where the U is, on Amazon, which is there's an ebook, paperback, and hardcover. And then I also have like a merch for Remember Who the Fuck You Are. I got stickers, hats, crop tops, and they're all on my website too. Oh, awesome. And right now I'm actually, for Black Friday, I started the sale today, but everything's 50% off. So.
Oh, well, I know where I'm going when this ends. I seen the beanie and I was like, I need that. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Especially as a neurodivergent, like it's funny because I'll wear black sweatshirts every day and sweatpants and then a hat like this, and it's 90 degrees outside, but I'm like, but I feel safe like this.
Yes, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It's so appreciated.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.